Hi, friends. I'm Lisa Talbot.
And I'm Ken Hagler.
And we're here to talk about the methods of Methodism, those spiritual practices that enrich and strengthen our hearts, minds, bodies, and souls. And today we're going to talk about the spiritual practice of honoring the body.
But before we get into that, we want to review our last topic, which we talked about confession and reconciliation. So, Lisa, tell us a little bit about what your commitment was and how have you been able to follow up on that?
Yeah, so the commitment that I made was to contact a friend who is one of those dear soul friends, like we talked about in that episode, and to arrange to go for a weekly walk with her and have a walk and a talk. What I have discovered is confession is more of a slow burn kind of spiritual practice because it is not an everyday thing. And so this practice is going to require a little bit more patience and a little bit longer time from me because I can't do it by myself. I've got to wait on somebody else's schedule. And also, like we talked about in our episode, it's not a daily practice of confessing to others, although the internal reflection can be a daily practice. So I have contacted my friend. We've set up some walking dates, and I'm really looking forward to seeing her and sharing my life with her. So how about you? What was the commitment you made, and what have you done about that?
Well, mine was to look for a spiritual director. It's been a couple of years since I've had one. And as a spiritual director myself, that's one of the things that I commit to. And so I went to the Spiritual Directors International webpage and looked for Anchorage and pulled up the list of all the spiritual directors that we have. And typically when I've done that in the past, I started going through and kind of looking and reading and praying over God's leading for that. To me, that's an important aspect of this journey that we're on. And, as we think about that, I guess one of the things that popped up when I did that we haven't talked about, and maybe it's for a future series that we do again on methods of Methodism, and that's to talk about the importance of the examen, and that is that personal commitment to our spiritual practices that we make. And that was one of the things that as I was doing it, I was thinking that, man, we really should have talked about that because that's part of this. Any examen is to do that and have that part of confession for our journey of faith. So I'm encouraged that you were able to do your part. I was able to do my part, and I want to encourage everybody else to go and look for that and give it some time. Mm-hmm. I think that is important, that it is a slow burn, and we've got summer, so get started.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting how all these spiritual practices connect to each other, because I was also thinking about the practice of patience is part of this. Finding that right person, like we talked about in our episode about finding that right person to build that trusting relationship with, whether it's a friend, a therapist, a spiritual director, or whatever, it takes time. And so we develop patience at the same time. So it's beautiful to me how all of these practices intertwine. We rarely do one thing at a time. There's always connections. So all of these practices are connected with each other, aren't they? And I had committed to taking a walk with my friend, which is part of honoring the body. It's that physical aspect that connects to our spiritual aspect. So this week we're talking about honoring the body. And when I think about the importance of taking care of our physical bodies, I go straight to the first chapter of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. And that incarnation, that incarnational theology, the embodiment of Jesus, is such a good guide for us on the importance of taking care of our bodies. And I love all the stories in the gospel that just show how embodied Jesus was. He ate, he broke bread. One of my favorite stories is when he spits in the dirt and makes the mud to smear on the eyes to cure the blindness. And I mean, it is just like gritty and spitty and dirty and physical. And it just really emphasizes for me the importance of our physical bodies. I think that there can be that perception that we have a body and have a spirit, and they're like these two separate things that wrestle with each other. But the incarnation shows us that body and spirit are absolutely intertwined. And so taking care of our spirit is taking care of our body, and taking care of our body is taking care of our spirit, that we can do both of those things together. Are there any scriptures or anything from our Wesleyan tradition that stands out to you when it comes to taking care of the body?
Yeah, it's one of those fun things that I've always loved, Wesley's, works and stuff, and people don't realize the width and breadth and depth at which John Wesley, who founded Methodism, really delved into so many aspects of humanity, humankind. And he actually wrote a series of books and materials called Primitive Physique. Now, I wouldn't recommend that for anybody's like consistent over and over again practice, because some of those things were kind of edgy, that they were part of that period of early scientific experiment, if you would. But Wesley was somebody that read widely and talked and studied a great deal. And in there were some things that I pulled out that are just so interesting to look at. That things that he talked about were that water is the wholesomest of all drinks. It quickens the appetite and strengthens the digestion the most. That's something that, what do our doctors say? And everybody says, we got to drink more water. We're not doing enough of that. I know, got mine right here.
Exactly.
Keep doing that. Here's coffee and tea are extremely hurtful to persons who have weak nerves. And sometimes
we've all gotten the caffeine shakes before.
I know, isn't that right? He goes on then to talk too about exercise. He said, walking is the best exercise for those who are able to bear it. Riding for those who are not. The open air when the weather is fair contributes much to the benefit of exercise. And that's just a few that are just kind of, wow, we can relate to that, especially going for a walk. I'm somebody that swims and have loved hiking through the years. So, that's part of our tradition, coming from Wesley, is that we've got to be in shape. And, a lot of folks may not realize that the United Methodist Church, as it relates to us as clergy, is very attentive now to our wellness, not just our health, but what are we doing? And we have, because of the giving that people give in our churches, that we have health coaches and plans that help us. I've got my Fitbit that keeps me logged in. Yeah, that keeps us going. And I think that's incredibly important. And Wesley saw that and saw that as part of, what we do. And I think it's incredibly something for us to remember, that, for us to be the hands and feet of Jesus, our hands and feet and our bodies have got to work, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this applies to people at every level and every stage of wellness. I'm a person who struggles with 2 chronic illnesses, but that doesn't mean it's not important to take care of my body. In fact, I'd say that means it's even more important for me to take care of my body, because I know the struggles that I have. And so when it comes to caring for and honoring our bodies, it doesn't matter what our age is. It doesn't matter what our weight is. It doesn't matter what our physical health is. There are always ways that we can honor our bodies and do our best to take care of them. But there are a lot of challenges. And I would say during the pandemic, there have been some significant challenges for me, and I'm suspecting for others, about maintaining their physical health. I've heard a lot of people joke about the COVID-19, and it's not the virus, it's the pounds. And so what are some of the challenges that you have faced, or that you've heard other people express that they have faced during the pandemic in maintaining their physical health?
Well, I think for most, it's just been that the temptation to being more sedentary, that we aren't, or we haven't been able to get out or be attentive to that, even to the point that for many of us that have memberships at health clubs, those have been locked down periodically throughout this period, particularly where we are in Anchorage. So, those limitations have really challenged people. And when you live in climates like ours, where winter can be very difficult. It's something to look for. I've seen people though being very attentive to getting out, even when the snow has been the deepest. Folks still getting out to walk, still getting out to exercise. When I've gone to get in the pool, folks have been there. But it really has been a challenge, and I think that's what most people express. And there's that natural part of our spiritual journey, and I think it may play into some of this, and that is our desire to gather is a desire to be active. And when our churches have been closed, it has made it even more difficult for those who are more sedentary for health reasons to be able to get out.
Absolutely. Yeah, boy, that sedentary lifestyle sure speaks to where I've been. The amount of time we spend on computers these days, Zoom meetings, so much more communication over email since we're not always seeing people face to face. All of that has really been a challenge. I've had the challenge of working from home that every time I get up for a break, I want to go check and see what's changed in the refrigerator. So I know that snacking has been a big barrier or a big issue for a lot of people. I know I've struggled with that. And then just the sedentariness of spending so much time in front of the computer. So I think that those are really common challenges that people have faced. How else have you managed to maintain some of your own physical health? I mean, you did mention long winters, and I certainly feel you. Down here, it has been a long winter, and even though we have some incredible trails outside, it's been icy, it's been snowy. Yeah. We're in the muddy season right now. So some of those things are barriers to getting out. But thankfully, we've got some beautiful beaches, and it's always nice to walk on the beach. There's that saying that there's never bad weather, there's just bad clothes. And so if you've got the right gear, it's
I hadn't heard that one. That's good. I like
the weather. Yeah. So I have managed to get out for beach walks. Just except in the worst weather, I'd say. What are some things? You said that you're a swimmer. That's great. So that's something that you can certainly do all year round.
Yeah, and that was a big part. I think definitely looking at what my overall diet was, and I had a doctor a few years ago was concerned about my weight. I have a little bit of a heart issue, and so trying to make sure I keep my weight under control. It for me and that's one thing I want to caution people on, rather than reading just John Wesley or whatever the latest fad diet is. To really talk to your doctor to get their guidance, because my doctor had me address a particular diet that she thought would work best for me. And it did. It was one that I could do. And it really had to do with, how I handled portion control. And it really helped me, the diet that I got on, to help me think through, what did I really need in order to maintain what my health was. But that's not what everybody needs. And I think people need to hear that each one of us is unique. One of the things that, I oftentimes use when I talk about spiritual practices and our uniqueness, the way God's created, is the Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas. And I talk about how God has made us fearfully and wonderfully, and we're each unique. And that includes our bodies and not just our souls and our personalities. A lot of times we think that it's just one thing fits all, but for each of us, I think it needs to be different. For me, it was increasing water and changing that portion control, how much protein and how many complex carbohydrates I was eating, and what those vegetables were that would help me to not only lose the weight, but then also to maintain at a healthy level.
That's great. And that's such a good reminder that everybody is so different. And like you, I've worked with my doctor for years now to manage my illnesses, partly through nutrition. And that's so huge and it's unique. So that is a really good reminder for people to talk to their doctors and really make sure that they're on the right path for their own bodies. I do love this time of year because we're getting towards farmers market season. And I love the huge variety of vegetables that are grown in Alaska, the things that are so local to us. I love sourcing food locally. I love eating halibut from the bay. I love eating veggies from the local farms. So we're getting into that season where for me, food is a huge connection to my environment. And I love that. I've been working in my greenhouse a lot. And so there's the physical activity of gardening, which is good. But then there's also that produce that comes from that gardening practice. And eating things that I've grown
Yeah.
myself is so appealing. It's more appealing for me than eating a bag of lettuce from the supermarket. I love being able to, the whole ritual of going out into the greenhouse and harvesting and washing and mindfully preparing a meal. So a lot of times it's that conscious effort. And you talked about that with the eating habit of just being more conscious. And I think that is one way that we can really take care of our bodies, is to be more conscious about what we do, especially in these more sedentary times when it is easy to get up and walk straight to the fridge. How about walk straight to the faucet to get some more water? How about walk to the teapot to make a cup of tea? There's a lot more things that we could do. Walk around the block to get a little breath of fresh air, and just being a lot more mindful about how we're treating our bodies, which are fearfully, wonderfully, and uniquely made for all of us.
That brings to mind, as you talked about the farming part, when I was in seminary, at Asbury, Dr. Donald Joy was one of my mentors, and he was from the Free Methodist tradition and grew up in the Midwest. And one of the things that he talked about that I really took to heart in more later years, I didn't understand it then, but he grew up as a son of a farmer, and he talked about the life cycle of the animals and being on the farm and the pattern of birth and death. And when I had the opportunity to begin to become an outdoorsman and hunting, one of the things that I've always tried to do is in hunting was to take what we hunted very much in the same form that you do for plants and anything else, is we're harvesting, and it's part of the life cycle. And they're trying to pass it on to my kids that this is part of the health of our world and how we're connected, that I give thanks for the harvest, regardless of whether it comes from the air or whether it comes from the ground. That when we put our hands in the dirt, or we put our hands into the body or carcass of an animal and we're caring for it, it's that connection to the life cycle. And one of the things that I think we miss in our society more than anything, as we deal with the issues of grief and suffering and pain, oftentimes that comes from a fact that we are not connected to the way God has created us and formed and shaped our world, and how these bodies are going to fail in time. We only get it for a finite period, don't we?
That's right. I'm not a hunter, but I love to fish. And the gratitude I feel when I fish, the gratitude to that fish, the gratitude for the whole process. I love processing fish. I love smoking salmon. I love packaging and freezing and stocking the freezer for the winter. That whole process of whether it's the produce from my garden or the produce from the land and the sea. I love to forage and wildcraft stuff especially in the springtime. The nettles and the spruce tips are going to start coming out soon. And so I think that when we honor our own physical bodies, it really teaches us to honor creation, to honor others' bodies and the non-human bodies that sustain us. And so again, it's just like all of these practices are so connected. As we learn to care better for ourselves, we also learn how to care better for creation. I did want to bring up one other point, though, because I recognize that I speak from a position of privilege where I can do most of my job sitting behind a computer screen. But I think another really important part of honoring the body is rest. And this is a place where I really appreciate womanist and mujerista theology that has always had the criticism of feminist theology that, oftentimes in feminist theology, it's the right to work, the right to be out in the public spaces, the pulpits, the boardrooms, and the right to work. Right. Whereas from a womanist and mujerista perspective, Black women and other women of color have always worked. Their work has helped create the society that we live in. And so the right to rest is so important. The right to lay down that burden and to be able to rest, to have the capacity, the space, the funds, that time and ability to rest. I think rest is important for all of us, but I also think that it's important that we recognize that it's easier sometimes for some folks to rest than for others. And so, how do we create systems in which rest is a part of everyone's life? And don't we have an example of this in the Bible with the Sabbath, where everything should cease for everyone and everything one day a week for that time of rest and reflection and time with God?
Well, I think of the Old Testament too, and the year of Jubilee. I mean, that comes from our heritage, as I always talk about, of our ancient faith that is grounded in Judaism and that pattern. And as I was talking to another colleague recently, I said, as I'm aware, unfortunately, our Jewish brothers and sisters never honored that Jubilee that I believe in history, and yet that was something God said every 7 years. Everything needs to be forgiven. Everything needs to go dormant. Everything needs to rest. And it's kind of what we've experienced as many of us have observed, I think, during this period of lockdown and COVID, is that the earth, society had to take a break. And that there has been a sense of renewal in that ecosystem that we live in.
Yeah. Some of my favorite videos from the pandemic have been the way wildlife has been taking back cities with humans not around so much. And so you see deer walking through the middle of downtown, or moose and bears in places.
We have moose and bear running
all the time up here, but it's really cute when it happens in the lower 48. But yeah, that whole sense of rest and renewal is so important. One of my favorite online theologians, her name is Tricia Hersey, and she calls herself the nap bishop. And as a Black woman, she advocates napping and rest and literally sleeping as part of faith. And I love that so much, because we live in such a grind culture right now, such a kind of hustle world. And so how do we resist that? We resist it through rest, and we resist it through those patterns. We've used the word rhythms before. We use it through those rhythms of life where we honor the culture and the pattern that God has set out. That includes time for the body, time for the spirit, time for work, time for rest. And like you said, this pandemic has given us in some ways some opportunities to do that, as people have reevaluated what their work life has been like and how maybe their work has taken over their lives. And I don't know about others, but I certainly am ready for more rest and for kind of a realignment of my schedule. So let's talk about commitments, because I've got quite the commitment that I'm going to share about honoring the body this time. As we've talked about this, what are some commitments that you'd like to make surrounding honoring the body during this time?
Well, I'll tell you what's really funny is that during this call, the reason I looked down a moment ago was my health coach just called from our wellness plan that we have. And for me, I found that, that has been a huge accountability. Talking about our time of confession last week and the need for accountability, having that coach calling me to let me know, that's an important piece of this for me. I think as a whole, I have found myself, and I just really want to continue. Part of it in recent weeks, my time in the swimming pool dropped off tremendously, and part of my commitment is to get back into that for certain. But in many ways, I've been able to, rather than having the COVID-19, I've pretty much taken off the COVID-19.
Nice.
So for me, I'm kind of in that place, and I really want to continue it. But I think for me, the other part is that really that need for seeking out Sabbath and rest, because I deal with personally, and this is kind of my own sharing, vulnerability, that I deal with chronic anxiety. I have a chronic anxiety disorder. And because of that, if I'm not careful, if I don't exercise and if I don't eat correctly, I get these levels of anxiousness and my blood pressure shoots up and I get panicked. I get in these places, and it can lead, for me, it can lead to clinical depression. And so I have to be really attentive to that. So finding those places and times, not to always be more busy, though that needs to be a point of health with exercising. It also needs to be, how do I find rest? And so where do I make time on my day off to take Sabbath? My wife, Lauren, is so good. When we got married, she said, you will take all of your vacation. Period.
Good.
End of story. Because I really was never that great at it. I would take it. Sometimes I'd, not, but, and her intent was, you need to rest. And so this year, I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm looking forward to a very restful vacation later this year that's going to be real important. So for me, there has to be that up here and here in me, a resting of things and myself.
Absolutely. Well, when our video is released, I will be on sabbatical. I am taking a 4-week sabbatical, and people keep asking me where I'm going on sabbatical. I'm not going anywhere. I'm shutting down my computer for a month, and that is the huge rest that I need. It has been a very long year of pandemic, and I have been church secretary, pastor, and tech guy all rolled into one. I did take some vacation time last year, but I was still editing and uploading videos for church services. And that's not a vacation. That's not a real break. So I am taking an honest to goodness, real sabbatical. So that I'm just so much looking forward to that time of rest and the lack of obligations, the lack of having a meeting driven schedule. I'm looking forward to being bored. I'm looking forward to waking up in the morning and going, what am I going to do today? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just really looking forward to that completely unscheduled time to do whatever it is I want to do. In addition to that really important rest, my husband and I are also planning some day trips to go canoeing for a day, or going to a different beach to walk on, or exploring some of the local hiking trails, and just doing what we can to get out regularly and really enjoy this amazing place where we live. And now that the weather is warming up and the trails aren't so muddy, it is really a good time for us to be able to get out and just explore and be out in nature more, which we both love and have missed over the winter, and are really looking forward to. So I will be on a beautiful sabbatical, and that is just going to be such a wonderful time of rest and breathing space. And like I said, I'm looking forward to being bored. It's been a long time since I haven't had 1,000 things occupying my attention. So that's going to be great.
You bring up something, though, I think it's real important that we're talking, you talk about our, kind of our privileged space where we are, and kind of where we live in kind of semi-urban, suburban, rurban, whatever term you want to use. But, I know there's going to be folks that may be tuning into this video living at other places in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and I always have been, what forms of rest, if somebody's tuning in from the Sudan or from India or from so many other places, what do you all find as Sabbath rest? And I think it's important that as pastors, we encourage everyone in their cultures that you need to seek out what is rest for you. So while you hear what Lisa and I are talking about is rest for us, may not be rest for you. It's not part of your culture. It's not part of your upbringing. And so rest can take many different forms. Now, as Jesus said, granted, I don't have a donkey anymore, but if it were to fall into the well, I'd pull it out. I mean, I have a Great Pyrenees. If he fell into the well, I'm pulling him out, but, the reality is there's things that we're going to do and need to do, but there's also the uniqueness of where we live, who we are, who our culture is. That Sabbath rest doesn't have to be what it is for us. Could be different where someone else is.
Absolutely. And I think there are so many ways to take rest. And a huge part of it is how can you have a day without your phone? How can you do a
Yeah.
media fast? How can you kind of shut down those inputs? And we've talked about that with some of our other practices, that sometimes in order to hear the voice of God more clearly, we need to silence those things around us that are those constant inputs. And that to me is a form of rest as well, because we're resting our minds from that kind of input. So I think people can be really creative with what they choose for practices. I want to throw out one more thing.
Sure.
Today is a really important day. Today is the national day. The day that we're filming this is the National Day of Remembrance for missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Right.
And so when we talk about honoring the body, I think it's important that we don't just think about honoring our own bodies, but how do we honor everyone's bodies? How do we honor the sovereignty of each person? How do we honor the Imago Dei, the image of God in every person? And how do we honor the fact that each person is fearfully and wonderfully made? And we certainly have seen, particularly with missing and murdered Indigenous women, that Native American and Alaska Native women have not been honored. A statistic I saw today said that there are over 140 open cases of missing Alaska Native women in Alaska right now. And in recent years, 80 additional cases of murdered women have been closed. And so over 200 Alaska Native women who fall into this missing and murdered category just in these last few years. And so I would encourage people to not only think about their own practice, how are you going to honor your own body, but how can you learn more about the care and honor of other people's bodies? A couple of resources are the Native and the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center and the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center. Both of those are great places that people can go to read and learn more ways of being supportive of Indigenous women, and to make sure that they are visible and a priority for law enforcement and for all of our communities. And so when we honor the body, it's not just our own that we're talking about, but the entire body of Christ, which is every single one of us.
You bring up a good point, and it was interesting because I was just having this conversation watching the TV show Below Deck. And some of the behaviors and things that took place. I said, you know what? It's amazing to me. This is such a sexual harassment case in so many times. And it's the little things of not honoring other people where I see offense taken with people in the show as members of crew are interacting and things of that nature. And we put that on television, and we don't often realize how we have it taking place right here in our own societies, in our own cultures, in our own neighborhoods. And I think maybe that's part of slowing down this idea of once we start to honor our bodies, that we start to honor that Imago Dei in everybody that we come in contact with. And it's what Jesus said, isn't it? Whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me. And that's a call for us to remember that do no harm and do good, even as we stay in love with God.
Absolutely. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for this series. Ken, you want to take us out?
I'll be happy to, and I want to encourage everybody to follow Lisa on Raven Fed and me as well at kenhagler.com or as Jedi Pastor Ken. That we are here. And if you've enjoyed this series, please let us know your feedback and comments or emails that you've appreciated this time of Methods of Methodism make a difference. And if it's something you'd like to see more of, I would say, please let us know. I know I've enjoyed it. Lisa, I hope you have putting up with me for 4 weeks in this thing, but please let us know. And if there's other subjects or spiritual practices you'd like to hear us talk about, leave those in the comment section below. We definitely love to hear, and please subscribe to any of our channels and be in touch with us, because we're here for you to walk with you on that journey. So as I always say, and I already said, do no harm, do good, stay in love with God, for indeed this is the way. May God go with you.
Amen.